African American women were also very active in the temperance movement as well. During this time period, it was not usual for Black and white women to organize together politically. So, in many of the movements that we'll be talking about, whether it's temperance or suffrage, we'll actually see that African American women were mobilizing and organizing around the same issues, but in different spaces and in different organizations. The temperance movement offered Black women opportunity to participate in an interracial organization and to achieve leadership roles and aid in their communities. So African American women were active in the WCTU, but there was a Black women's unit. So they still were not organizing collectively with white women. But the temperance movement was one of the first times that we saw Black and white women organizing together in one collective organization. I want to speak about Frances Harper, who was one of the uh, key organizers, African American women organizers in the WCTU. She started to address not only issues of alcohol abuse, but also homelessness and incarceration of the poor. She was very social justice oriented, social justice minded. She believed that the WCTU should expand its focus to include other goals, and particularly federal support for anti-lynching laws and for the conviction of or the eradication of the convict lease system, which many thought was an extension of slavery in the sense that if someone was sentenced, they were basically allowed to be able to continue to work as slaves, unpaid labor. There's an article here for you to check out on Frances Harper. So please make sure you read that. I wanted to speak really briefly about some of the ideological conflicts that emerged as Black and white women were working together in the temperance movement. Frances Willard often came into conflict with progressive African American anti-lynching crusader Ida B. Wells. Um, Willard often depicted alcohol and substance abuse as something that was associated with Black people in the Black community. So Frances Willard is the president and primary leader of the WCTU, and you have African American women who are also trying to organize around alcoholism and abuse as it impacts their communities in the same way that it impacts the communities of women. Yet white activists are particularly focusing on the ills that occur in a society when there is alcoholism amongst Black people. And of course, Black temperance workers had conflicts with this. And so we can start to see how within movements, the role that race or what we're referring to as intersectionality, when we see all of these different identities merging together, create very different political views, different ideological views on issues. As you can see down below, there is a quote that Willard is known for having made, which Ida B. Wells came out against very actively in some of her writings as a response to Willard's thinking. We're going to keep in mind that the ultimate goal of the temperance movement was a constitutional amendment. The WCTU found it very difficult, however, to advance their political agenda by themselves as women. There was a new organization that emerged. It was called the Anti-Saloon League, and this was an organization that was predominantly led by men, but they were also very helpful in working with the temperance movement and the WCTU in the cause of lobbying for temperance. As a result, the 18th Amendment was ratified on January 16th, 1919. However, I think we're all very familiar with the fact that to this day we can still buy alcoholic beverages. So clearly, prohibition was overturned. It was ratified some years later in the 21st Amendment that repealed prohibition. Um, but the history, I think, here that needs to be told is thinking about another way in which women's social activism brought about key social change in society. And of course, to always be very mindful of why these issues matter to women. Why was this important to women? Why was it important that we be a society that does not, advocate for the use of alcohol? It's also interesting to think about the ways in which these movements scaffold, they build on one another. And as we can think about our discussion of the abolitionist movement and how the abolitionist movement gave voice to women to actually start to mobilize and think about themselves as social actors. And that made women start thinking about how they were restricted in terms of their movements. How can we engage in political action if we're wearing a corset and we can barely breathe? So this is giving rise to a dress reform movement. And now women are thinking about their abilities to bring about change in a different way. But women are now also starting to think about the ways in which certain social ills are impacting their families. So the temperance movement was really about women organizing to protect the home. And then the suffrage movement builds on the temperance movement because not only was it many of the same leaders, but these leaders were using the temperance movement as a platform. They were arguing that the only way that women will ever be able to bring about true social change in society is if women have political rights, if women have the vote, if women are franchised. And so from here, we start moving on to a discussion of the suffrage movement, which is also associated with the very first wave of the feminist movement. So that's my kind of brief overview going through the slides. Please take some time to go through and read them in more detail, but definitely make sure you're clicking on all the links, checking out all of the short documentary clips that are very informative, that just enhance the things that we're talking about right now. And also make sure you do any additional readings that are embedded in this presentation. I also want to use this as an opportunity for everyone to know that you are free to chime into these discussions whenever you like. So we've got a discussion board. Please make sure that you ask questions or make comments. I really enjoyed listening to the things that you all have to say on the discussion board. So keep the great dialogue going. In addition, I'm in my office, so feel free to come by and see me whenever you like. The next update is going to be information regarding your first exam. So make sure you're checking your inbox and your announcements. Take care.